All factors considered, the massive amount of shortcomings, the fact the game is underwhelming, the fact the game is too short with no replayability, it's too easy, graphics that don't perform well, and the fact that the game just feels like it's 9 years too late, I've got to give The Last Guardian a 7 out of 10. The subject of today's review is The Last Guardian. In this review, I'm going to outline the pros and cons. I'm going to let you know exactly what I think about this game after such a long development cycle, so stay tuned and here we go. On the original PS4, which I played it on, sadly this game has tons of frame rate issues. Because honestly, I feel my experience was greatly hampered and hindered by the incredibly low frame rate in a lot of places in the game. This game is begging for a modern control scheme. Why couldn't they simply put a little targeting thing out there so you could say, go right there? I don't know what they were thinking with this. Again, I think maybe it has to do with this incredibly long development cycle that they had, and I really think that it could have been done better. It does need to be said that the actual plot of The Last Guardian is lacking significantly. I played the game for 3.5 hours and only saw one actual snippet of any kind of backstory of what happened with these two, and it really takes almost 6 to 7 hours to even try to get any kind of an inkling of what the hell is going on in this game. But the last hour of The Last Guardian has most of the story reveal in it, and I'm sorry, but in this modern era, you shouldn't be expected to play 7 to 10 hours of gameplay before you get any kind of an idea of what the hell is going on in a video game. Got another puzzle, another room to get out of, more platforming. Can't someone just please, for the love of God, tell me what's going on in this world or universe, so at least I've got some kind of a hook for a reason that I want to keep going. The modern gamer, sadly, may have an issue with this. They may lose patience and say there should have been more story development or something earlier on in the game. But here's the difference between Shadow of the Colossus and The Last Guardian. Had tons of unique bosses. That boss itself was a puzzle. So even though you didn't know what the hell was going on with the story, you were challenged and you were interested because you figured these bosses are probably part of the story. It's just a lot of generic platforming and puzzling. There's very little uniqueness to the puzzles of The Last Guardian out of any game that you've probably played in the last 10 years. This game was supposed to be released 7 to 8 years ago, at that which time it would have been a unique experience. And so, although there are some really annoying and concrete issues with the frame rate and graphical performance on the original PS4 console, ultimately the major issues with The Last Guardian end up being a matter of timing. The problem is, the last generation, we saw all this before. There's almost no challenge here because if you've played games of the last 10 years, you've done this kind of stuff before, and it makes it incredibly easy to figure it out on the fly. Spoken dialogue with puzzles and with platforming and with cool graphics and all of that. And all of that just kind of gets brushed under the rug when you say, oh yeah, it's 2016 and I've done this a million times before. This isn't anything unique at all. Oh yeah, and by the way, they're selling The Last Guardian for a full $60 price tag. By the way, there's zero replayability in the game because guess what? There's no collectibles. There are no hidden items, nor are there multiple ways to solve the puzzles. There's one way to solve every single puzzle. You do it once, you progress on, and you never care about it again. When you beat The Last Guardian, there's tons of plot holes. There's tons of things that are completely unexplained about Trico, about the protagonist, about all kinds of stuff. You're left to kind of try to piece it together in your own mind, but even ultimately then, there's not enough information in the game for you to concretely get the full story on what happened in the actual story of The Last Guardian. Sorry, but for a game that already feels dated, that performs graphically poorly on the original PS4, I'm expecting more. I want a full, concrete story. If I'm going to pay you full retail price, I have to feel I at least got something out of the game. It ends up feeling underwhelming, it ends up feeling dated, and it just ends up feeling sad, as I've read a ton of mainstream game reviewers absolutely kissing this game's butt, saying that it's one of the best games of the year. I can't even tell you that it would make my top 10 games of 2016. This game didn't even have that many great games. The Last Guardian is too easy. It's boring, it doesn't have enough variety in the gameplay, it doesn't give you enough concrete story, and it performs graphically inferiorly on the PlayStation 4 original console. 7 out of 10. The gameplay, it's incredibly dumbed down. No longer do you have to worry about actively dodging the zombies at all. Frank will just walk through them as if they're not there, pushing the mobs with his shoulders, and actively just being able to basically run through entire streets full of them without too much effort. You can swing and kill hundreds of zombies with these weapons before they even start to wear down and give you any kind of a risk of breaking. So in that regard, there really doesn't feel like there's any kind of a survival aspect to this game at all. All of those major things that were kind of iconic with the Dead Rising series are really missing. The element of horror, the element of risk, it's not really a factor because you really don't have much of a chance to die. Remember those psychopaths, those iconic boss fights that you had in previous Dead Rising games? They're gone. They've traded them out for what are now called maniacs. It really is ludicrous how easy it is to kill zombies, how easy it is to survive, and how quickly you level up in this game. The game is super simple. There's a zombie outbreak in Willamette. Frank returns back to find what the hell is going on. The plot isn't very interesting, and in fact, if you just rush through the plot of Dead Rising 4, you can probably beat this game within 4 to 5 hours. Yeah, it's that short if you're just focusing on the plot. I got immersed in this open world. I wanted to try to find every single blueprint, make every single silly combination weapon, and because the zombies were never too much of a threat, it was actually pretty easy to do so and find myself getting immersed in this open world exploration mechanic. There are hidden rooms throughout Willamette which you need to find keys to open. You also need to find blueprints, obviously, to create different kinds of weapons, but there's other collectibles as well, such as cell phones and vlogs, which play out some of the background story of the game that doesn't necessarily play out in the cutscenes. These are completely supplemental and optional. You don't need to grab them, but they do happen to give you some pretty good experience points when you do, so it behooves you to be looking around. So there is a lot to do if you're actively looking for stuff to do in this game, but it's easy to skip it and run right by it if you're only focusing on the story. It's incredibly easy, and again, I think the main problem people are going to have with this game is that it's so easy compared with all the previous ones. An exosuit in a survival horror game doesn't really mesh very well. It basically makes it ridiculously easy to survive, and again, it's changing the entire vibe of the game, going from more of a horror or serious aspect to a more silly one. That's fine, as long as you know that's what you're going into when you're playing Dead Rising 4 and that's what you expect, it shouldn't bother you too much. So overall, fans of the original games are probably going to hate Dead Rising 4 because it is so different. But if you're going in looking for a fun holiday romp, ripping zombies from limb to limb, and just having a gory good old time, a more casual laid back combat experience with some open world exploration and looking for collectible style mechanics, you're probably really going to enjoy the game. This really isn't a game that's serious business at all, and I don't think that's what they were going for. I actually spent about 15 hours because I was really enjoying the holiday vibe and a lot of the silliness of the game, and I ended up playing it a lot longer than I thought I actually would, which is obviously a good thing. It lends to the fact that, yeah, it is kind of addictive and fun because it is so easy. You'll want to explore a little bit more and look for those rarer weapons and see what you can find. I don't know, for me, I almost would say this would be a great game for a long weekend rental, especially again if it's the holiday season and you really want to enjoy yourself, but for a full $60 purchase, I would really not recommend this at all. Honestly, even though I really enjoyed playing Dead Rising 4, I am not going to spend any more money on this game. And it's funny that I say this because guess what? There is so much controversy surrounding this practice and the fact that this game had so many changes to it that it didn't sell very well. And already you can find Dead Rising 4 2 weeks after release for $40 in stores instead of a full $60. And so, all things considered, all these factors thrown in, the fact that the game's been dumbed down, it's more casualized now, the fact that pieces of the game were removed to be sold as DLC, and all of these things considered, I give Dead Rising 4 a 6 out of 10. If the game actually had an overtime mode like all these other Dead Rising games, maybe I would have given it a little bit of a higher score. For the past month, I have been immersed in the world of Final Fantasy 15. After so many hours invested, it's finally time for me to review this game. All kind of know what the consensus is when it comes to Final Fantasy 15, which is the following. There is no consensus. Other people really don't see where the 10-year wait came into play with this game. If you're not aware, this game originally was going to be part of a trilogy of games set in the Final Fantasy 13 universe, but due to so many continuous delays with game development, that whole idea was scrapped and Final Fantasy 15 was eventually pulled into its own universe and became the game that it is today. These main characters are way better. I would like to hang out with these guys in real life and have an adventure with them, while the characters of Final Fantasy 13, most of them I just like to punch straight in the face if I ever met them in real life. Ultimately, the game is about the main cast of 4 guys going on this platonic relationship adventure. It's a lot of fun, especially if you are, I'll be honest here, a guy who's had a group of male friends before and you've gone on a road trip or had any kind of travel or an adventurous kind of experience together. You're going to understand this kind of camaraderie, and it really comes through in the game. The only complaint I can really give to them is that sadly they run at 30 frames per second or slightly lower. Even on the PlayStation 4 Pro right now, you cannot get 60 frames per second performance out of this game, and that's sad because I do feel that there are certain parts of the game, in particular the combat, that would benefit from it. Quite a lot of content for the price of a regular retail game. Also, end game dungeons, which I'll be completely honest with everyone, they're not very fun. They're just incredibly repetitive grinds of the same exact looking corridors and caves. The only real purpose of these dungeons is number 1, to level up your characters massively, and number 2, to find some of the more rare and epic loot in the game, but they're pretty damned boring to go through. Now, the combat of Final Fantasy 15 seems to be one of the major points of contention that make people either love or hate the game. It's a neat system when it works. A lot of the times, if you're out in a nice open field, or maybe you're on a military base, if you've got a lot of room to maneuver, the combat system of Final Fantasy 15 is awesome. It feels like something revolutionary, something different. You might even say, why didn't they do something like this in the past? But as soon as you get into anywhere that's close quarters, such as a confined room, an indoor area, a cave, for example, which, by the way, is a very common place to be in an RPG, you start to see why this combat system breaks down. It's very simple. It's because the camera doesn't really work with this combat system. Fighting a group of 10 enemies, but you can only see 2 on the screen because of what the camera's doing. The enemies will be mobbing you, and again, you won't be able to see, gee, am I supposed to be dodging right now? Should I attack right now? Can I warp anywhere? You just can't see. The camera single-handedly ruins the combat system of Final Fantasy 15 because when you're in these big, tight, confined spaces, you just can't freaking see what the hell is going on. And a lot of the times what ends up happening in the game is you end up spamming recovery items. Now, this is another major criticism that people have of the combat of Final Fantasy 15. You'd be absolutely awful at the combat of Final Fantasy 15. You're still gonna be able to progress in the game because of the crutch of this item system. Why they make it such a crutch, and I think, honestly, the only logical reason that I can come up with is that they knew the combat system of this game didn't work all the time. They knew that there were gonna be fights where you were gonna cheaply be downed repeatedly over and over and over because you can't see what the hell is going on. Let's just put this crutch in so that someone who's not great at these kind of games could just get through it and beat it. And honestly, that's awful. That literally shows that the game developers knew there was a massive flaw with the major combat component of their game, and they did nothing whatsoever to fix it, but instead said, put a crutch in there or put a band-aid in there so that people could still be able to beat it even though it's not fully functional. The combat of this game is incredibly divisive among gamers, and you can definitely see why in some of these fights. Magic doesn't feel like magic at all. First of all, doesn't use MP. Like I said, the MP is for something completely different. So why the hell they call it MP instead of, say, dodge points, I have no idea, because MP has nothing to do with the magic system of the game. It really does feel like magic was almost not even thought out to be a part of the combat system. And then all of a sudden at the last minute, the game developer said, well, we gotta have magic. It's Final Fantasy. And they found a way to wedge it in last minute rather than actually putting any kind of like intelligent or conscious thought into it. It really does feel like an afterthought, and the magic is very disappointing. The combat of Final Fantasy 15 actually works. It works really well and it's fun. The problem is, in my experience, it only worked about half the time. So half the time you're actually fighting, you're incredibly frustrated and want to tear your hair out because you know what you're supposed to be doing, but you can't tell what the hell is going on. That is a major shortcoming for an action-based RPG. The story of Final Fantasy 15 is kind of bittersweet. It just feels so rushed. Like, they had half of a game done and said, wow, up to this point the game's amazing, and then at some point someone said, well, guess what, guys, we're out of time, we just got to rush this game and finish it, and they just completely skipped through giant chapters and elaboration. There's an entire chapter that takes almost 2 hours to complete. Most people collectively agree this is the worst part of the game. It seems incredibly out of place, and again, it seems kind of like they had an idea for what they were going to do, and they wedged it in rather than actually fully exploring it or developing it. The story is kind of unfinished, rushed, grand and epic idea, and they implemented it well for the first half of the game in that first open world area, and then they completely screwed up the rest of it, rushed through it, and just tried to get it out there to sell rather than worrying about it being a complete package or even any kind of a meaningful experience. 10 years of game development and comes out unfinished is completely unacceptable in 2016, and it's why so many people have issue with Final Fantasy 15. The two major components of an RPG are the story and the combat, and both of these components of this game feel unfinished. Absolutely amazing graphics, the likability of the main core characters, and the insane amount of content that there actually is to perform in the game. This game probably would have been critically panned, but a lot of people end up finding themselves enveloped and immersed in this universe, and even though the story kind of sucks and the combat is unfulfilling, you still want to keep playing to see what that next epic boss monster is going to be. So many low lows with the non-functional combat 50% of the time, the terrible camera, and the unfinished story that makes this game so impossibly hard to review. I give Final Fantasy 15 an 8 out of 10. I give you maximum truth and minimum bullshit.